Alright, so I have the old neck here, and as you can see I've taken the strings off, so it's really just the neck itself. And again, this is the one with the stripped out truss rod, and I have the straight edge on here. And just to kind of show you, even with no string tension, I'm just going to run a light by here, and you're going to see there's a big gap. So again, really bad forward bow. Whereas if you look, I'll turn the camera a little bit. If you look on this this first fret, as it gets to the edge, that's where you start to see the light getting blocked, which is what it should be doing all the way down the neck. So that's how you can tell that there's a pretty bad forward bow, because again, on the very end, you can see the light is actually being blocked. And as you start to go towards the middle, that gap gets wider and wider. When you get to the middle of the fretboard, again, this is around 9th or 10th fret now, you can see it's a pretty significant gap where the light is coming through. So unfortunately, that's what we were faced with the old neck, and since the truss rod nut was completely stripped out, we can no longer use it the way we intended. I might be able to use this for like a fun project, but it's probably not ever going to be a functional guitar neck again, unfortunately. At least not until I have some really specialized tools in a nice workshop where I can take the fretboard off and replace that truss rod, which I don't feel like doing right now. So yeah. So this neck we're going to set aside, and we're going to take a look at the new neck that came in. And actually one thing I do want to do a little bit later is show you how I found the radius of each of these necks and how you can do that as well. Alright, so once again, I am taking the new neck out. And as you can see on this one, a bit of a different story. Again, same scale length. Once again, and I don't know if you can tell, but I am putting the straight edge right down the center line. Just gonna come in a little closer here, right down the center line, so you can see it's actually kind of cutting in half all the inlays. I don't want to go off to the side like this or off to the side like that, because the neck does have a bit of a taper. As it gets closer and closer to the nut, it'll get more narrow, and as it goes towards the bridge, it gets a little bit wider. So that's why I always like to try to keep it centered to find the actual amount of relief. Now, this might vary if you have like a twist in the neck, but in this case, we're really just trying to find out if there's a forward bow or backward bow. Now, in this case, if I do that same test, and I'm using one hand here, but you can see going down the neck, it's pretty flat all the way through. There's a little bit of a gap here just because I can't really hold this down. But as I shine this down here, if you see it popping up, that's just because I'm not using my other hand. But you see how all these kind of teeth, I guess you could call them, they're not really letting a whole lot, if any, light pass through. So this neck is actually pretty flat right now, which is great. And the other plus side is that the truss rod nut is fully functional. So we can actually use that to adjust it in the future if we have to. Now, when it comes to the radius, how I was able to ascertain that, and how you can figure this out, if you have this Music Nomad kit, or something similar that comes with these radius gauges, they come in different sizes. There's 7 1/4, 12, 10, and 9.5 on one of them. The other one has a 14, a 15, a 16, and a 20-inch radius. So again, you have a couple different options for different radii, I guess is the correct plural. And a quick and easy way to tell what radius you have is you can see, I'm just going to hold up two different ones here. So if you look at the 7 1/4 and the 20-inch radius, one of the major differences is obviously that the 7 1/4, because it's going off of a smaller circle for reference, it's going to be a bit of a tighter curve. And the 20-inch, on the other hand, is quite a bit flatter. So we can actually use this to quickly find out what radius we have on our fretboard. So I'm going to show you on the new neck how I can find that. We can pull up the old neck as well, and we'll see if they actually have the same radius or if they have something different. So let's actually start off with the 7 1/4. So I'm going to use the most curve, the tightest curve radius we have. And what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to reorient the neck here. And we're just going to use the 12th fret for the purpose of this. And hopefully, let me point the camera down a bit too. Alright, so here's the 12th fret back here, sorry if the focus is a little off. And I have the 7 1/4 inch radius on top of it. Now, I'm actually going to turn this light off, and I'm going to use another light source, which is this LED flashlight here. And I'm just going to shine the flashlight behind the radius, and you're going to see that there is quite a bit of a gap there. Now, what's good about that is that that tells us that the 7 1/4 inch is too tight of a curve, because you can see the gap is directly in the center, and it kind of fades out until the very edges here and here are actually covered. So basically the corners are touching, but the curve in the middle is just a little bit too tight, which is allowing that gap where light is coming through. So we know that the 7 1/4 inch is not the correct radius. It is too curved compared to the radius of this guitar's fretboard. So now let's switch gears and let's go to the flattest of these, which is the 20 inch radius. And this I think is typically used for like classical guitars with really flat fretboards. And here, once again, shining the LED flashlight behind it, you're going to see the opposite problem. So this is too flat, where I can get one side or the other covered, but then as soon as you do that, you're letting the other side come up a bit, and there's that gap on either side. So in this case, if you touch it directly in the center, the sides will let light through. So it's kind of the opposite problem, right? So using this little trick, you can go back and forth and find out which radius. So let's take that 7 1/4 inch one, and let's flip that over to the 9 1/2 inch. Hopefully that shows up on the camera. And let's see. So now that, again, there's a little bit of a gap there. So the 9 1/2, again, there's that gap in the middle, which means that one's too tight. Let's go to the 10 inch and see if that's a little better. Okay, 10 inch is a little bit better. There's still that gap in the middle, which means it's still just a little too tight. Let's go to the 12 inch. Now the 12 inch looks pretty darn close. There's still a little bit of a gap, but if I move it back a little bit where it's not shining on the inlays, that has pretty even coverage all the way around. Now, if we want to check that, we can always go to the next size up, which in this case is 14 inch. And 14 inch looks to be a little too flat, because you can see, again, if I go side to side, if I block the center, the light's coming in on either side. So it looks like this is actually a 12 inch radius, based on, again, just using the light as a reference here. Because although there's a tiny bit of a gap here, it's pretty even overall. It's probably not going to be exactly 12 inches or exactly 14 inches. It's going to vary a little bit, because as you sand the wood down, you are slightly taking down the radius, but that is pretty much what we are looking at. So this is a 12 inch radius fretboard. Now we can compare that with the old neck, and again, I'll use the same thing. I'll use the 12th fret as a reference here. Move this neck down a bit. You can see the missing inlay here. But we'll do the same thing. So again, we'll start off with the 7 1/4. I'm going just past the inlays here. And again, 7 1/4 is just a little bit too curved. 9 1/2, just a little bit too curved. Let's go to the 10 inch. The 10 inch looks pretty close. Let's go to the 12. And once again, the 12 looks pretty even overall. Maybe even a little bit too flat. I mean, this might be like an 11 inch, but the 10 does look like it's just got a little bit too much of a curve to it. And since 12 is the next size, and it looks like it's pretty even with how it's covering the light there, we're going to guess that it's probably a 12 inch on this one as well. Let's take a look at the 14 just to be sure. And yeah, that 14 is just a little bit too flat in comparison. So the old neck also looks to be a 12 inch radius. But anyway, I just thought I'd share that so you can quickly use light to help you figure out which radius your fretboard is using.